So it's been over 3 months now since I sold my RTX 4090 for a 7900 XTX, but why did I do it? Was it a huge mistake or did I make the right call? Let's talk about it. Okay, so I feel like, guys, I've been holding on to the 7900 XTX for long enough to give you guys my full impressions on whether or not I feel like it was really worth swapping from my RTX 4090 to the 7900 XTX, as on paper, it doesn't really make any sense. The 7900 XTX should be significantly slower than the RTX 4090. So first of all, if you didn't watch my previous videos, real quick, why did I do it? And it mostly came down to driver issues that I was having with my RTX 4090. And in fact, since then, I've gone ahead and put together a list, as you should see on screen right now, of all the various different driver problems that I was having and continue to have with Nvidia RTX 40 series GPUs. Now, as you can see on screen, they have knocked out a couple of these issues since I started collecting them and reporting them to Nvidia. So it's great to see that they are making progress, and maybe as time goes on, they can finally squash all of these annoying bugs. And some of these bugs are more than just annoying, they're actually incredibly irritating and can lead to my job actually becoming much harder. Custom resolutions are locked out, DSR is locked out, DLSS is locked out, you get 5-second black screens when alt-tabbing out of full screen games. Displays can cause the entire driver to freeze up. The new 57-inch Samsung Neo G9 is locked to 120Hz. The Nvidia control panel is incredibly slow to apply changes. And the last issue that I have with Nvidia cards when it comes to display problems mostly is, well, they don't have DisplayPort 2.1, which, let's face it, that's kind of unacceptable to be charging $1,600 and using an ancient DisplayPort 1.4 connector in 2023. I was really shocked when they brought out the 4090 and didn't have it, and it's definitely biting them in the butt right now, especially when you look at stuff like the 57-inch Neo G9. So those are most of the issues and reasons as to why I felt like I was kind of being driven towards AMD against my will. So I actually put my money where my mouth was and purchased a 7900 XTX, and here we are over 3 months later. I've been using it, and we have to answer the question, was it a mistake? And I think we first have to answer that question by talking about the performance, because yes, the 7900 XTX should be a much slower GPU than the RTX 4090, but guys, in my experience, that's not necessarily the case. It does depend on what you do, but for example, my specific 7900 XTX has an insanely high power limit, and these cards can scream when you overclock them if you give them enough power. And it allows me to get, as you can see in Apex Legends, around a 20% actual performance increase over the stock values, and that actually puts it really close to the RTX 4090. In fact, when I did a 5-game average of the games I was currently playing, it was basically identical to the RTX 4090, at least with ray tracing off. Now, some people do really value ray tracing right now, although I feel like we're just not quite there yet, so I typically don't enable it, and I don't value it that much, at least not yet. But I do want to also mention that AMD's Adrenalin software is actually really good, and in fact, I would consider it to be much better than the Nvidia control panel. Now, I'm typically someone who says if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but at this point, I think the Nvidia control panel can be qualified as kind of broke. It just doesn't work real well, it's really slow, and there's so many features that AMD has in the Adrenalin software that just work really great that don't really happen in the Nvidia control panel, such as I can have a game open, hit Alt-R, open the Adrenalin software, and make changes, and they will apply in real time. That's something that you typically can't do on the Nvidia control panel, at least in most cases in my experience. So overall, in terms of performance and the actual usability, I've had a really good experience with AMD, even when it comes to stuff like video editing and other professional work. It just works really well. I don't have crashes, I don't have problems, it's not slow. It's overall a really great experience. So the question is, was it worth it? And wait, we can't answer that question yet because, of course, not everything's perfect. So Nvidia has their problems, and of course, AMD has their problems too, although I will mention definitely not as many. But if we take a look at their problems, some of these could be frustrating to other users as well. And to name them off, we have stuff such as FreeSync HDR actually locks the incorrect gamma curve on Tizen OS displays in my experience, although they did add EDID editing, so there is a workaround to this, thankfully. And one thing I did notice is that most of the AMD problems do have workarounds, which is not necessarily the case for Nvidia. Then another problem that has no workaround is crashes due to testing unstable GPU overclocks actually necessitate a full system restart most of the time, which is something you don't have to deal with on Nvidia. And in general, I'd say Nvidia's driver installation and recovery is just a little bit ahead. Then another thing would be that programs like MSI Afterburner, if you have them open on a second monitor while you're playing games, it'll actually cause stutter, and that's actually kind of an issue, as that's something that many people wouldn't even know to check for. Then another issue would be Microsoft Excel graphs sometimes disappear when you type on them, Oculus VR AirLink shows distortion in the right eye, and then DaVinci Resolve audio tracks in the cut panel can sometimes also just disappear. And then the other big issue that I want to bring up to you guys before we talk conclusions is the upscaling. And yes, Nvidia is definitely ahead in this area. I mean, Nvidia has frame generation support in far more games, but many people don't really care about frame generation. But I think you will care about the DLSS versus FSR2, because let's face it, in general, DLSS is definitely better quality than FSR2. Now, I have found some unique instances where at 4K in a certain very small number of games, FSR2 can look better, but in general, DLSS does look better and has less issues like shimmering or other artifacts while giving you similar amounts of performance. It just seems more consistent across the board. There are times when FSR2 is good, and then there's some games where FSR2 is honestly pretty bad and looks far worse than even XESS, and definitely a lot worse than DLSS 2. So I think Nvidia in general definitely has a leg up in that department, and that can lead to a situation where if you're playing a lot of games that do have DLSS and FSR2 as an option, even though an overclocked 7900 XTX can come very close to a 4090 at native resolution, well, at a similar quality level, that Nvidia GPU might actually be significantly ahead. So that is definitely an advantage for Nvidia, and I expect more and more games will start to go that route as time goes on, unless AMD continues to improve upon FSR2, which I do think they could. It just depends on whether or not they do, and that's something I don't know. DLSS is better now, and that's all I know. But at the end of the day, you know, is it actually worth buying a 7900 XTX over an RTX 4090, and will I be sticking with the 7900 XTX? I mean, you can get an RX 7900 XTX. I think I've seen them as low as $800, although I think they're typically between $900 to $1,000. But if you do find it at $800, that is literally half the price of an RTX 4090. And considering in my experience that it actually has less issues, and if you overclock it can come very, very close to an RTX 4090, yeah, it's hard to recommend a 4090 in its current state over the 7900 XTX for double the money. Now, I did mention that Nvidia is working on their driver problems, and if they get basically all their driver problems fixed, then maybe at that point in time, maybe I would recommend it to people who just want the fastest and don't care. But right now, it's kind of hard to recommend. And for that reason, yes, I will be sticking to the 7900 XTX going forward. And no, I don't regret selling my 4090 for the 7900 XTX. But hey, that's just what I think. Do you think it was a big mistake, or do you think I made the right decision? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below, and of course, I'll see you in the next video. If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, AMD and Nvidia release new GPUs. Also, if you want to see more, check out one of these related videos. You won't be disappointed.